Welcome, everyone. You are at, in case you were confused, the Green Bay Power BI user group for February 2021. We are encouraging those to come on in and join us, and it's meant to be interactive. We've got some great presentations lined up today. Our Master of Ceremonies, Steve Erbach, is coming up to walk us through the agenda and things we've got going today. Help me welcome up Steve to the stage.
Oh, man. Here we go. Let's see when I get to the deal here. Okay. You should all see the Power BI user group thing or no?
Yeah.
I'm still seeing my screen. Are you sharing
All
yours
right.
yet?
Oh.
Let's see. Make sure that I'm doing this correctly. And
I'll let you know.
Oh.
swine computers.
Would you rather I shared your slides?
Just a second. Just a second here. Oh, I gotta select the right deal. There. Okay. Here's our slideshow.
There we go.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We have meetings every other month, and our meeting today is loaded. Have 5 speakers altogether. We'll first go over some, events, things that have been happening in specifically in the dynamic communities world, which is the parent company of a whole slew of Microsoft user groups. And we started out as being part of that group of user groups. Anyway, 5 speakers: Paul Van Dyke, our Toastmaster, Dustin. Actually, I have never heard Dustin's last name pronounced, so I'm not going to say it. And I've got something to show. Robert Connolly of Process Analytics Factory. Oops, I'm sorry, I misspelled factory. And our featured speaker is Marcus Radue of Skyline Technologies in Milwaukee. All right, let's move on. I have a bunch of these scattered throughout the presentation. All right, news. As it says here, we got word that the existing PowerBIUserGroup.com website, pbiusergroup.com, is going to be maintained through June. We had been told that today would be the cutoff day, but I guess they had enough complaints that they're going to extend it through the middle of the year. Dynamic Communities has started up a new site, and we'll show a couple. Well, you can see it here on the slide. I did a screenshot of the way our user group appears on the new Digital Acceleration Community site. The link is right there on the slide. We'll have the slide deck posted on our user group homepage so that you can download it. All of these links are live. And the link at the bottom of the screen here, mydacfeed.com, is where our group is located. They're still working on things like little things like formatting the web pages and posting forum questions and so on, but I'm sure they'll work it out. All right, next meeting is March 25th. We don't have a featured speaker just yet. We do like to have 3 or 4 members give short presentations about Power BI stuff, and we've got 4 of those today besides our main speaker. So we're always looking for people to give short presentations of stuff they've been working on, neat things they've found, tips, tricks, traps, all of that stuff. So you can contact any one of our leaders in this group. All right, some new features. From Interstellar. Okay, the official announcement of new features from Microsoft is on their Power BI blog online. There is a link to the YouTube video, which is a little over 28 minutes long. A lot of stuff in the December update. And I've got a screen print of the Power BI blog page and also a link to that page. So normally we'd show two updates, but apparently I just learned this, that Microsoft doesn't do an update in January. So we have one. I found that Power BI blog page, if you were to print it, if you're old school and you'd like to print it to read at your leisure, it's over 50 pages of printed material in this blog. I like this gal, Ruth Pozuelo Martinez. She is an MVP, Power BI MVP, and her examination of the December release is at that first link there. That red shirt she's got on, when I watched this video, it does actually have blinking Christmas lights on it. I've also linked to her latest, as of January 20th, DAX Friday recording. You can see it says DAX Fridays number 194. She does them like clockwork, and boy, that's almost 4 years worth. And the link to the most recent one is right there. Highly recommended. She's quite good with Power BI. You don't need to see his identification. And then to show how hip we are here at the Green Bay Power BI user group, continuing the Star Wars theme. If you haven't seen any of these, I don't know.
I saw too many of them. Way too many of them.
Probably in a box.
This is one of my favorites. These guys, Mike Carlo, who is the organizer for the Milwaukee Power BI user group, is a Microsoft MVP, and he has gotten a bunch of MVPs together every month to go over the new release of Power BI. So this is the latest one, and there are 11 of them this time. It's really quite a thing. If you're looking for some high-level Power BI discussion, this is the place to get it. The link to this video is right there in the PowerPoint deck, which you'll get. All I've got to say about it is that the first 10.5 minutes is nothing. It's just we're going to start soon. So Mike was recording during that whole 10.5 minute period when nothing is happening. All right. Then, just in general, business intelligence. And we're going to start our Power BI presentations for this meeting with Paul Van Dyke on Power BI subscription levels. It seemed like a lot of people were interested in that. And Paul, if you want to take it away, please do.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. So for 15 minutes, a quick overview of Power BI subscription levels and kind of costs and our own experiences with it. You should be seeing a slide deck that has a quick 5 points that I'll be covering. Let me get this into presentation mode so you can see all of it. Basically, I want to talk through the different levels that I see and features, as well as cost considerations. And it's starting with the desktop, going through Power BI Free, Power BI Pro to Premium, and then the new Premium per user. So the next visual is the framework of how I kind of describe Power BI and break out into different pieces. The green section of this diagram is the stuff that is kind of beginner, the first things you'd start using, and the free parts that relate to Power BI Desktop as the tool that's part of this platform. The red parts of this diagram relate to the Power BI service, what Microsoft offers up in the cloud that you publish to, that allows for all the collaboration and distribution of what you've made. And so the green side is beginner, getting started, and freer, and then the red is more what is capable out there in the service. So when we talk about these different levels, the first thing I like to point out, Power BI Desktop is completely free. It is a free piece of software Microsoft offers. You don't need to have an account with them. You don't need to have any particular setup or anything through your business. Power BI Desktop is free. It occupies the left side in this green area of this picture because it's the first thing you'd need to start connecting and getting data. So it connects to data sources, it reads in from databases, and inside Power BI Desktop is where you build out queries, data sets, and reports. And you can do a ton and not pay anything. It has all the capabilities of connecting and getting data in and looking at it that you'd get with a Power BI Desktop tool for visualization and things like that. So that is $0. Then we're going to move on to the red portion of that kind of diagram, which is more about the service. Now, the service is all the offerings that Microsoft has in the cloud, where you're now getting an account and you have a tenant with Microsoft, and you're going to be putting reports up there and taking advantage of the cloud capabilities. So the best way to think about Power BI free is what is it that you can do before you'd have to start paying money with Pro. So Power BI free, you can have an account with Microsoft. You can even connect up and publish your report into the service. You can take advantage of some of the things up there in the cloud by having it visible in a browser for yourself when you want to look at it anytime. But you don't get the ability to do things to collaborate with others. There's no emailing of subscriptions. There's no peer-to-peer sharing. There's no putting it in a kind of an organized many reports in a workspace to keep track of things. You don't get those things, but you still can interact with the service and put your report up there in the cloud, and you use it for your own personal purposes, and you're still paying nothing. It's free. Then the next level is getting on to Pro. So Power BI Pro is now, we're still in the service, but now we're paying the entry point $10 per user per month. So it's priced out per user that's going to use it. And now it's opened up the idea that you can now collaborate a bit with others. You now can make subscriptions. You can do peer-to-peer sharing. What you need to think about, though, is everyone that you want to collaborate with also needs a Pro license. So it's not just $10 a month and now you have access to everyone. Anyone else that you want to share your reporting with and do this kind of collaboration in the service, they need to also be paying $10 per user per month.
Paul,
so yes.
Can you expand on collaborate and what type of functions do you do when you can collaborate?
Sure. In the Power BI service, you've put your report up into that model, and now it's available for others to look at. So it's now at a URL. It's a web page that you can send others to. You can share with them. You can set up they can set up subscriptions, and there are features within the service for people to put notes and comments attached directly to a report. So you can live comment back and forth, much like you might see on social platforms where you can mention, or you can mention other people's names. Like here in Teams, you can kind of mention people into chats. There's a utility for that with your reports to collaborate with them on. And then the availability and control over who can see the report is available to you. When you share it to others and you set permissions, you can control who can get in and view the report. And you can organize multiple reports into what's called an app, so that if you had certain categories of groupings of reports, say this is sales, this is marketing, this is another area, you can make an app workspace for that and control who's looking at it.
Paul?
You think? Yes.
There's a question from David Dunst.
Yes.
Does the Microsoft 365 E5 licensing include Power BI Pro?
It does. Good point, Dave. So this $10 per user per month is only one of the ways that you can have this Pro capability. E5 licensing, which is a SKU for Microsoft Office, includes Power BI Pro. Most places I've ever seen only have E3. It's a fairly standard use case for Microsoft Office that companies I've seen that gives you Microsoft Excel, Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, the standard tools. So pretty much just about every place I've seen, most people have just E3. They're unlikely to have E5. But if your company is really down the path of getting the most they can out of Office and have an E5 license, then they do get Pro along with. Good point. Any other clarifications or thoughts on Pro that you want me to cover?
There's a question about what the difference is between E3 and E5, like
Sure.
the main ones.
Okay, so I kind of covered, it's a matter of levels of Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office having so many tools in it, they broke it up into so many different ways you can buy it. Commonly, E3 is what most people get to get your basics with Microsoft Office, and E5 is when you really want to climb in and have everything. You'll get Power BI Pro, you'll get Microsoft Access, you'll get a bunch of other of them, everything Microsoft wants you to use as part of their Office platform.
There's another question that says, from Kristen, my company only uses on-premises Power BI report server. We don't use the Power BI service. What licensing is needed for those who contribute, meaning save reports to the server?
Sure. That is a level that, let's see here, when we're thinking about this breakdown, I didn't cover here. So if I were to add another point on here and talk a bit about on-premise Power BI. So what she's describing is Power BI Report Server is a software you can download and run on your servers internally, a lot like reporting services in the past. It is actually kind of looks like reporting service is an extension of that. Companies can use that if they, and then they're licensed properly, if they have SQL Server Enterprise licensing that covers that same machine. And that enterprise licensing is covered under an active SA, service agreement, for support. The key there is the SQL Server Enterprise. One way of entering this world and having Power BI server on-premise, no cloud, none of that, is if you have SQL Server Enterprise, you can put Power BI Report Server on the same machine that is licensed for SQL Server Enterprise and has an active service agreement.
And Enterprise doesn't have a per user cost, does it?
Enterprise is generally, I can't say I'm an expert on how you get it per user, but generally you pay per core. So it's usually based on the amount of hardware you have on your machine.
Yeah.
Enterprise is only core based.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So we kind of went through the very free start of things. Now we're into per user pro and some clarification on what that means when you're collaborating with others and you're out in the service and you want others to work with you. You each need to pay $10 per user per month. Now we're going to talk about Power BI Premium. I like to constantly remind people this is premium capacity. It's a bit like a virtual machine or a server in the cloud. You are buying capacity. The big breakthrough with Power BI Premium is you are now you're allowing an environment, premium capacity, where everyone can view the reports. So you might have a wide audience of report viewers who aren't going to be making reports. They can view any report that's been made to run within that premium capacity. And you no longer do they need to have pro licensing in order to just view and look at the report. So think of premium as $5,000 a month in order to have your own capacity up there in the cloud, allowing everybody to view reporting that's in it. So you can see this breakdown here, which I took right from Microsoft's site, the most pertinent features I thought were useful. Power BI Pro here, Power BI Premium. So it's in regular, like we said, Pro is included with E5 licensing. So you have Pro, and it's licensed per user, whereas Premium is 5,000 a month. There are other SKUs, so there's more details here. This is pretty high level, but the most common way to think about it is when you're buying premium capacity, your base entry point is a P1 SKU for 5,000 a month. Cheaper ones are available, but they have not the same front ends availability in the service and things like that. It's fairly common to be thinking in terms of 5,000 a month to get that premium capacity. You can having that premium capacity allows you to have an on-premise reporting server. Like we mentioned before, you'd have to have SQL Server Enterprise in order to have that on-premise report server. If you have premium, you can have an on-premise report server to cover your needs when you don't want to be in the cloud. It's dedicated computing environment versus that shared environment. And I highlighted this piece because really that's the key. Your Pro is required for your users to create reports, but Premium allows for sharing. So one thing to think about is that 5,000 a month gets you the premium capacity, but you still, this dot here indicates you still, if you want to share a report, you're still going to need a Pro license for whoever's creating the report. So you still need $10 a user a month for anyone to create a report and put it into the premium capacity for everyone else to view. So a common pattern, and one that worked with my company, was we ended up looking at Pro licensing until we reached a break-even point closer to needing premium, because you can have technically 500 Pro users before you'd be getting the same value from having 5,000 a month for the premium. So what the common pattern that I see and what worked for us is we did get Pro licensing until we were close to 500 users, and then we got premium and reduced our Pro licenses down to only those people that are going to make reports. So out of our 5,000 employee company, now 5,000 employees can look at what's in the premium capacity, and only about right now 15 people make reports. So that's a common thing. So other differences between Pro and Premium, sizes. So the amount of data, maximum size of a data set, 1 gig versus 10, maximum storage of 10 gig per user versus 100 terabytes, maximum number of automatic refreshes per day, 8 when you're doing Pro and 48 when you're in Premium. So there's a bunch of other things. If you go to this link here, Microsoft has a more full breakdown. Any questions on Premium?
We have a question for David. For Premium, Is the data kept on premise or in the cloud?
Premium capacity is in the cloud. You are buying capacity within Microsoft's cloud services. This 10 gig, 100 terabytes, 48 refreshes, and I think 28 gig of RAM are all cloud-based capacity. All right. And the newcomer onto the stage that's kind of throwing things around is Power BI Premium per user. What this is the ability to take premium features and have them available for that, what would have been $10 a month. We don't know the price on this because it's too new, it's in preview, and they haven't really said what they're going to charge for this. But the idea being that you have the features that Premium, high-end features that Premium likes to tout. So you'll see in here things like artificial intelligence capabilities, AutoML, impact analysis, cognitive services. Let's see here, what else is XMLA endpoint connectivity. That's for those of us who love SSAS cubes and really want to connect to them. Enhanced automatic page refresh, things like that exist as part of premium offerings that you don't really get if you're just using Pro. And down here, the differences in per user, you're still not going to be able to have Power BI reports on premise. So you might license it per user, but you'll need premium capacity if you still want to have a Power BI report server on premise. There's some other advanced things. Bring your own key is pretty advanced. I don't get into that much. Multi-geo support for those of us that are concerned with our resources running in the right version, right area of the cloud. You don't have that with per user versus having dedicated premium capacity. The key to this is that has some flexibility for those cases where you're never going to reach, say, the 500 users that we did in order to get premium. You have a targeted specialized analyst group of 20 people and 5 more analysts. So 25 people are the only people that are going to analyze, look at data, try and do artificial intelligence and come up with data that needs to be looked at. Then you're not going to need premium capacity to the tune of $5,000 a month. You can just do the per user premium. Now, it's not going to be $10 a month because that's the baseline of Pro. So somewhere between $10 and $500 per user per month would be my guess, but I'm just shooting in the dark. If anyone else has better perspectives or ideas on what that might end up being, feel free to pipe up. But
I talked to our rep a couple months ago, and we got the trial started, and he said pricing, they were hoping pricing would be available next month. So
right.
Hopefully we'll hear something soon.
Sure. And for me and our use cases, we had already gotten to the point where we had so many users that premium was really more effective. That premium per user isn't really something we looked at too close. Where we might have a case where our capacity that we've used and dedicated to our corporation for everyone to use is saturated, and someone comes along who's high-end data science and wants to do his own thing. Well, rather than ruin our capacity, we might also buy him or her a per user premium so that they can do some advanced stuff. Maybe there's a use case for that kind of thing. All right.
And I guess with that, to view anything published in premium, you also need premium. So that's
yes.
So you create a workspace with premium, and
correct.
You need premium to access the workspace. So
yeah.
it would be
premium is a capacity. Yeah, the way I wanted people to think about it is premium is a capacity that you have purchased that has this much space. And then when you have reports in premium, you move workspaces into premium, your report is hosted and it's out of that premium capacity, everybody can view it. Is that what you're going for, Greg?
Yeah, I guess I was at the premium per user.
There you go. Yeah.
So premium per user, you need to, both users, the person who creates it and the person accessing it needs premium per user.
Yeah, when you're premium per user, yep, same thing.
Correct.
You're not going to be able to collaborate with or share with anyone else unless they're also covered by their own premium per user, or there's premium capacity they will put their material into. Gotcha. Great. So that was the quick high-level breakdown. There's lots of nuances to this. I'm going to put my slide into the chat. It's at a URL that we can look at the slide deck, and then there's the links here at the bottom of each slide where I kind of stole the images and past data. So there's more nuances there you can go check out. And any questions?
There's a question. There's a question about, is there a way to keep the data on premises? I mean, you may have answered that, but
when you are dealing with, say, let's go back to this initial picture, and you see that the red parts of this diagram are about dealing with the Power BI service. That is Microsoft's cloud service offering for Power BI. If you put a report up there, it's in the cloud. If you publish a report that has imported a lot of data, it's in the cloud. It is not on premise any longer. You can, I can imagine someone's like, okay, well, premium capacity, I get that, so I can have an on-premise reporting service. You could do that. And your premium capacity of 10 gig, 100 terabytes is not being used, I guess, just so that you can have a Power BI report server on premise and keep it out of the cloud.
Paul, this is Jorge.
Go ahead.
So you could maintain your data on-prem and still use the capacity as long as you have your data sources on-prem and going through the gateway.
That's true.
So we do at Plexus use cubes, analysis services behind the scenes, and that data, all the data stays in on-prem. The only data on the capacity, it's going to be cache data for those reports.
Yep, that's a good point. If you are connecting from that service through an on-premises gateway, then the data is either direct query, and what it is just cached bits of data, or the summaries that people have asked for from their cubes that are on premise. that are being copied into the service and made available for people to view. Technically, when I think about people's objection to having data in the cloud, though, your data is still being copied to the cloud, just maybe some less of it.
Crystal Harold posted a graphic which we'll include with our PowerPoint slides that shows the differences between E3 and E5 licenses, and a kind of a nice graphic. So that'll be available to everyone.
Nice.
All right. Any other questions?
Thanks, everyone. Back to you, Steve.
All right. Thank you, Paul. All right. I don't know if anyone's,
Are you taking it back?
I think so.
I'm still presenting. I'm still presenting.
Let's see. Right, you are. We want this. There we go.
There we go. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm not sure what this means, but it looked funny, so I posted it. Our next presenter, Dustin from Heartland Business Systems. Dustin, I'll let you pronounce your own name. I don't want to take a stab at it.
Sounds good. It's actually, it's more similar to how it looks, but it's Radue.
All right, Radue. Okay, Power BI report development tricks. So go ahead and share your screen, Dustin.
All right, let me know when you can see it. So what I'm going to be sharing here is just a couple of things that, for the most part, are out of the box, and this is front-end development kind of tricks that can really help drive adoption of a new tool. So when you have people that are weary of Power BI or not wanting to learn a new technology, just a couple of little things that you can do to make it much more user-friendly and kind of fall in line with the concept of like great design shouldn't need instructions. So if you design something that is user-friendly enough, there shouldn't be instructions of how they can use or consume the data. So for starters, I always like to try and use measures or whatnot to make the titles of the report dynamic. So it changes with what they're looking at. A couple of little tricks would be, so if you're trying to convince somebody to like drill down into the data, that concept's a little bit more confusing. So I like to use bookmarks that are literally just doing the drill into technique, but it will it makes it a little bit easier to, if they want to look at something by month or by day, versus having them click through on the actual like drill through functionality. One thing I always run into is just real estate and running out of space on the screen. So again, using bookmarks, I like to sometimes hide filters that may be less commonly used or not front of kind of the report, to where you can adjust your filters on here, and then you can hide them again, and then your report filters to what you want it to be. Up here, I've gone through and just did a couple of different views, again bookmarking different pages to show different parts of the data. A lot of things I often see, and as an Excel guy myself, a lot of times you just want to get the data so you can export it down into Excel to do some more slicing and dicing. So having a nice detail tab helps out. One thing that I've started experimenting with a little bit is the dynamic text functionality. So to be able to create little summaries or whatnot to kind of send off in like executive reporting or whatnot, creating these summaries that will dynamically change with how the report is sliced and diced or filtered. Again, all just in the name of being kind of user friendly and trying to make it as easy as possible for the information to be consumed. Overall, a couple of things that I like to use is the chiclet slicer. That's what the year, quarter, and months are. I think it's kind of a nice slicer to use that's not, I guess, like that you pick up out of the marketplace. Also in this one, for this visual, I used this image one, which I thought was kind of neat how it selected the different images, and then you can kind of bring them up based on what you have in the report. Again, though, nothing in here is crazy advanced. It's just using a lot of the core functionality of bookmarking views and then hiding and showing those as kind of you press the different buttons.
Hey, Dustin, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, are those images just like flat images that you uploaded, or are those images actually coming through a data source? And the reason I'm asking is because we will soon be having images in one of our incoming logistics databases for quality. And I always thought it would be cool to bring in, like, on a quality report, if something is damaged, it'll have an image. And I'm just curious to know if that's what you're doing here.
So these images are all out online. So I just sourced them from a website. So I just grabbed them and then saved the URL here.
Okay.
If you could configure it in a couple of different ways, though. So you could configure it if it was saved out onto like a SharePoint site or something, just pulling in that URL into your data.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Dustin, are you doing, I see you don't have any tabs on the left showing. Are these separate pages? Are these just hidden? Are you hiding visuals, or is this a bunch of separate pages that you're bookmarking with buttons, or how's this working?
Yeah, so it's 3 pages, and I can pull up my desktop version too. So it's 3 pages, and then instead of having, when you hide them here, I then just bookmarked the different pages up top here. So that's how you click through it. Again, just kind of from that user experience of I like it as a touch of, oh, I want the detail, I click the detail, versus having, when you're in the service, having the pages over there.
So you don't have, you have a single page that's not hidden. So is that why there's no tabs on the left?
Correct.
Okay, very cool. I like it.
And then these also, as they pop out, so I can kind of now for the behind the scenes look at it, it's whenever these buttons are being used, this is just a box that gets hidden or shown based on the bookmarks. So bookmarks can be used in a couple of different ways to change. And if you think of a bookmark as a snapshot, it can be the snapshot of your entire screen or your entire page, or you can adjust the bookmarks to only manipulate what you have, like the visuals that are selected, for example. So in this like hide and show functionality, I'm only adjusting what is in this box, that the additional features, and then this image here I'm hiding and showing a different one. So that's how I can select something in here and I select my region and then I hide it, and now my whole report is using that slicer, rather than if you take just like a snapshot or just using the bookmark to do the entire screen, it would then reset it to whatever it was set at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very cool. Did you call that a chiclet slicer on the left?
Yeah, so if you go to the marketplace, it's a chiclet slicer.
All right.
It's similar to the list slicer, kind of like the standard functionality, but you can set how many like columns or rows you want, and you can there's a little bit of extra kind of editability, for lack of a better word, that you can use, but it's kind of a neat tool that's available from the marketplace.
Very cool.
For free. It's not, you don't pay for it or anything, but.
Awesome.
Was the dynamic text also from the marketplace, or is that part of?
So this is actually just a measure that I created. So it's looking at the different slicers. So this one is saying, if a year is selected, give me that year. If it's not selected, just give me a blank, or if multiples are selected. And then this one also has like the manufacturer name in there. So if I don't have anything in this list selected, I'm just having it say it's the manufacturer quantity report. But if I select one, then it knows to select that name.
And that's the same with your top revenue provider for the
one on the main page, Dustin.
Correct. Yeah. So it's doing the same thing here.
Your summary.
No,
your summary.
Summary.
The summary pop-out window you have.
Oh, so that is sorry. So that is using dynamic text.
Yeah.
So within a text box, you can write your different values, and like you can ask questions of your data. So you can kind of type in here and say like, okay, what is what year is it? What are the total sales and whatnot? I will admit that it's a neat functionality. It's a newer release. I can't remember exactly when it got released into general public, but it is a little clunky. It's a little bit again, its claim to fame is you're able to ask it just like natural language questions, which become a little bit difficult to get exactly what you're looking for. But it's kind of cool. Another thing that I noticed that's a little bit off on it is you can copy it out of here, because that was kind of my thought, as being my background was as a financial analyst and sending out different reports of like kind of little sentences. So I was like, oh, that would be a really cool use case for that, to be able to give kind of your verbal summary. But you're actually not able to copy and paste out of when it's on the service. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But you can still have like your written summaries there.
You could snip it, but you can't fully functionally.
Could you add a summary page that has that in there, and then set up a subscription on the summary page and have it emailed to a list of subscribers?
That's not something I personally have done, but I like to say anything is possible, and I don't see why you couldn't do that, because you'd just be setting the subscription based on a value that's coming from that report, or like an alert setting on that. So I would say yes, you could do that.
I think I hear someone trying to ask a question.
Steve, it's hard to hear you.
Try again.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep, now I hear you. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Dustin, I just was curious about your image visual. Did you get that in the store? Which one is it? I was just curious. I'm trying to download. I got Image Grid, but it doesn't look like you can just place an image link. And I would be looking for something that would be pulling from our database, referencing a concatenated URL that would point to an image referencing our data.
So I use this image grid that I got off of the marketplace, and in my data, I have the manufacturer, and then the logo field is just categorized as an image URL. So again, the ones that I'm using are I just picked this website and went and pulled them off of there. But the concept is that you could use that with wherever your data is, or I mean, you could have it saved out on SharePoint or wherever you can direct it to, you could use that then.
Okay, yeah, it's part of the data. That's good. You have multiple images on that. Okay, I see. We would include all the images based on the filter of the report, correct?
Correct, yeah. And then there, for this one in particular, similar to some like the other visuals where it's actually like sized by, so this one's by quantity, but you can tell it reorders them based on the quantity of the logo, which is tied to the manufacturer.
Very cool. Thanks.
All right, any other questions for Dustin? If not, then thank you very much. A lot of good comments in the chat.
Yes, awesome.
And here's a
awesome
quote. That is fantastic from Scott.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for letting me share.
You're very welcome. All right. We'll continue. And here we go. Okay, just had Dustin show us those Power BI report development tricks. And go on to our next deal. I like this slide. How many times have you offered help and then, oh, not today. Okay, I'm going to show a couple of slides about the new app source exploration tool. You may remember me showing this for the past several meetings, screenshots of Gil Raviv's custom visuals exploration. It started out as a PBIX file, and it was nice for getting some in-depth tips because you could download the PBIX. You did have to pay for it. It was 25 bucks. But then this graduated to a Microsoft App Source site, and that's what we're looking at here. And it showed, this is from a couple months ago, showing 299 visuals. The app now has been taken over by Microsoft and has gotten an interesting facelift. And this is what it looks like now. Not much of a difference, except look at that total apps number, almost 15,000. That's not Power BI custom visuals. This is every single app that is published on the Microsoft App Source collected together into this tool. Now we have a couple ways to filter it. There's a drop down. I'm still in the slide deck. I'm going to switch over to this. Here we go. You see my my web page here, the Apps on App Source web page.
Yep.
Okay. So to get to the Microsoft version of this, I'm looking now at the Power BI blog. The one that I told you was 50 pages long. This is about 2/3 of the way down into the page. And it has a link to go to get the app from the app source. And when you click that link, you'll get to this page, which is on the, more or less the marketplace. And you can get it right here. It doesn't cost anything, but for you to have it installed on your online Power BI collection of apps, you have to go through the Get It Now, and then it's integrated into your own account. So this is my account, and I'm showing the apps on Microsoft App Source app. Too many apps there. And as I said, we've got almost 15,000 apps, and we can filter them a couple different ways. One way is to look at the apps by product here, and it shows mercifully not very many products. And the Power BI custom visualizations are shown here in this list. It's also shown in this drop-down where, well, you're supposed to work. All right, I'm just going to click this one. And
be patient. You're sharing your screen on Teams. Teams will slow all of that down.
Aha.
Every time I present anything in Power BI and I'm using Teams, it's, everything's 5 times slower. Great.
Yeah. There we go. We got a refresh to show just the Power BI custom visualizations. There's now 315 of them, and it shows the average rating of them all. And the default listing shows it by rank. So out of those almost 15,000 apps on the Microsoft site, Chiclet Slicer, which Dustin showed us in his cool presentation, it's listed here. It is 16th in the rank out of all of those applications on the Microsoft site. This slider right here takes us down to the bottom of the list, and we see the histogram chart has a rank of 14,910. A couple other features here. Any of these links here will go to the page that allows you to download. For instance, here, this is the hierarchy slicer. I just went to that page. Then you can see as I hover over certain areas, it gives you a little bit larger view of what that custom visualization does. This one creates a word cloud. We can further filter by the publisher. You can see the list of publishers here. And we can also do things like filter by the release date. The old application that Gil Raviv started had a column in this area here, which showed the release date. Now you need to go down to this deal. So I'm going back to August of 2020, and then it filters, and I must have clicked beyond that. Let's go here. In July of 2020, there were 10 applications that were posted to the app source. And so that's one way to filter these. I'm going to go back to the main list there. And then there's this funky presentation called Play by Rank. It's got the VCR buttons over here. If I quote play this, it starts with the lowest ranked item, and then every few seconds it clicks up to the next group. And let's see, there. So it's going through, every couple of seconds it changes based on the ranking. Some of them have tied rankings, and we'll see three of them that have the same rank, like this. I hit the pause.
Have you seen anything, Steve, that talks about licensing?
No, actually. I mean, I'm sure there are some of these are paid, some of these are free.
Yeah,
but
there's
it doesn't.
There's not any kind of searching, filtering, or sorting by that.
That is a good question. I do not see anything other than these filters here,
Yeah.
And so that VCR button thing lets you look at applications based on the ranking. All right, I'm just going to stop this and get back to the beginning. Okay, that's pretty much all I wanted to show you. This app is available if you go to the blog, and this is the blog for the December update. And here it shows a list of all of the things that have changed in the December update, and I found that in the editor's picks under visualizations. And we jump down here, and there is the apps on AppSource. And then we've got that link to get it from the AppSource, and that'll take you to this page where you can download it for yourself. The PBIX file is still available from DataChant, but it's now $40. That's if you want the source code. Okay, that is all I have on that. Any questions?
No questions in the chat.
All right.
Going once, going twice. Gone.
All right. We'll go back to sharing the screen. I'm going to stop sharing, or back to the slideshow actually. Robert Connolly from Process Analytics Factory has a demo that I think you'll find very interesting. I know that Paul looked at it, and I did too. It's very, very interesting. I can't describe it more than that. Robert, I am going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. Is it visible now?
Nothing yet. There we go. Something coming through. Got it.
Got it? Awesome. Okay, so to introduce myself a little bit, I'm Robert Connolly. I work at PathNow as a data analyst, and PathNow focuses on Power BI and process mining in Power BI to create value from business processes. So, just talked about that. And I'm going to start with talking a little bit about process mining so that everyone who is not 100% familiar will know what lingo there is and what I'm actually talking about as I talk, because I don't want anyone to get left behind and just be like, what is this guy even talking about? So first, just to explain process mining itself, got to explain where it came from. So process management historically has been done by going throughout your company, asking different people at different levels of your company, hey, how do you do this step? When you buy this, what do you do? What's next after that? And how long does that generally take? And that's done through like interviews and things like that. So the logical next step that PathNow is exploring, and other companies, is process mining, which is more to do with data-driven decisions on that process management. So it's not about interviewing, it's about actually literally taking your data from your ERP or your data lakes, throwing that into Power BI, and in our case, and seeing your step-by-step process and knowing, what did you actually do and what are the steps, what's the time on those, and then a cost if you have one associated, who is doing each step, things like that, as well as how often you do each step. So what is process mining? I just described that a lot, but we're going to go here. So a data requirement that I need to note is a thing called an event log. So if you're familiar with process management, you probably know what it is, but a real quick summary of it. Basically, you need an activity name, which is anything that you do in your process that you think is of note. So like if you have a user going through a website and you want to know, okay, we have login, then we have add an item to cart, and then we have check order, and then check out, and then finally log out if you're, they're on Amazon or something. but you also need a case ID for that. So in the case of the example I just gave, that could be their cookies from that particular visit to Amazon. It could be a combination of their account number and then like the time that they came onto the Amazon. Basically, what you need is just this unique identifier to follow your case from step 1 all the way to your final step so that you know you can link them all together. And the final thing you need is a timestamp. So at what time did each part take place? So you really just need those 3 things and then you're off to the races. Just a quick mention, there's things called case attributes and event attributes. A case attribute would be something that applies to the whole case. So for example, if I'm on a customer journey and I know that I'm talking about like their journey in Amazon, the fact that they're in Amazon, so we'll call that a case attribute because we know they spend the whole time in Amazon. Whereas maybe I'm looking at a journey in when you're on eBay or something. So another case might take place on eBay. That's called the case attribute for calling it eBay. And then an event attribute would be what happens at each step. Is there something unique about that? So if we have a company, a resource might be your event attribute because they are only accomplishing one step. They don't go through the whole process. This case goes through the whole process, but each step is a different person or bot. So that would be an event attribute because it doesn't apply to the whole case, just one step. So I hope that was a simple enough explanation real quick here about what process mining is and the data requirements. I'm going to jump into the live demo so that I can show you what that means in Power BI. Okay, so everyone can still see my screen clearly?
Yep, coming through.
Awesome. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, so right off the bat, you might not know what you're looking at, but obviously this is Power BI Desktop. But what is this here? So PathNow is a suite of visuals that we use for analysis and process mining. And as you can see, we have this flow from a start node through create purchase order and all the way to the end. So just as a little heads up, the data I'm showing is a purchasing process or a procurement process. So you purchase your company purchases something, you need approvals to actually do that purchasing. You eventually get the goods, and then you post your invoice and pay it. Just as a quick little summary on what I'm actually showing you. So right here, we have the Process Explorer, and what we're doing here is giving you that complete holistic look at your process as it actually is. So this is taking your data, finding one step, and going from that step all the way to the next one, and then the next one, and showing you in this. And a little terminology, your different ways that your cases can happen are called variants. So I'll show real quick a visual of what that looks like. So I'll select your top variant. So 471 of our cases go through this variant where we start with purchase order, go through our approvals, and then into the invoice piece of it. So that's one way to do your process. And then another way would be to skip some approval levels. You only need the one. So that's our next most common variant. So just the ways that you can actually do these, that's what you have as your variants. So we chose Power BI because we thought, Power BI has so many great, you can get data from so many different places, and we just love how it interacts with everything, and I know you guys do too. So everything that I'm showing is going to be fully interactable. So like I said, I was clicking, this isn't a PathNow thing, this is just, an attribute slicer that was downloaded from somewhere. So you can also use this Process Explorer to see all of your variants at once. So all of the way your cases goes, which is going to look a little bit spaghetti-ish, but that's just if you do it this way. We can also bring this slider here. And now I'm looking at our most uncommon variants. So we can see a lot of our most uncommon variants. So we have 84 cases, starting with purchase requisition rather than purchase order. Okay, so that can be interesting to us. What does that say about our business? Should we make it standard that we do a purchase order, because that's our most common way, and it seems to go a little faster. And the way I'm telling it goes faster is using this visual on the top right. Whoops. This will adjust as you like take your different lead. Oh, sorry, I guess because the Process Explorer. But if you do like the bottom variance here, it'll adjust your lead time. So the unique variance being longer. So like I said, we determined maybe we want purchase order to be our standard way of going through our process. We also have this conformance checking mode. It's hidden under the 3 dots here, but there's a button. And you can create a process model, which was formerly done in like Visio or in a meeting where you will say, hey, like what is our actual ideal process? Let's build a model of that and see how it actually goes. So here we allow you to see what your actual process is and use that to build your conforming model. So I'll go to the top here and I'll say my top 2 variants. I'm going to select those and then mark them as conforming. Clear that. And now what it's going to do is show me the variants and the pieces that aren't conforming. So if I bring this out a little bit, we can see when we have purchase requisition, that doesn't conform to what we want. If we skip the approval levels, also not conforming. This is a self loop here. That's showing not conforming. So that's just one way to go about conformance in here. And since I don't have too much time, I'm not going to go through everything in the same detail. But one thing I want to point out that actually helps the analysis with this is these little pieces on the edges here and the tooltips. What we're seeing in here is your average duration with this red edge. The reason it's red is because your average duration is 11 days and 5 hours, and this is gray because it's 15 seconds. So this is just how we help do some analysis visually. As well as here, if you'll notice, we have a thicker arrow than, let's say, up here, because we have less cases going through. So it's like a volume indication to you just right off the bat looking. So yeah, that's process mining. This is our basic page. This is where I just like to start with all my demos, just to show what's going on and what you can actually do.
Nice. How does this work with Power BI? Is it a custom visual? Is it a separate product that you just happen to use Power BI with?
So we're fully embedded in Power BI. PathNow's visuals are. All of the process mining visuals I'm showing, it's a suite of visuals that would be downloaded. So we have an attribute filter, a case viewer, the Process Explorer, which I was showing, and a few. I think there's about 10 or 11 of them. So yeah, that's what we offer in terms of the Power BI side. There's a back-end aspect to all of it. You have to do some data massaging to get your event log to be correct. But I'm going to focus on the Power BI aspect unless someone has questions about the other part.
Sure. And the data, the one you're using here for the demo, how much data would you, how size is behind this particular model?
Sure.
For it to be this comprehensive?
So this is a demo data set where we only have almost 1,000 cases, which is a really small data set if you really consider an enterprise case.
Probably pretty clean,
I mean,
too.
I know that we handle. Oh, sorry, you said what did you say? I
was going to say probably pretty clean too.
Right. Yeah. So I know that we handle though with all of our customers, it's more in the millions. So a big thing that decides that data is how you choose to create your event log. So I've worked with customers that have customer journeys, like I said earlier as an example. And customer journeys can be particularly large data because you have so many customers coming into your website, let's say, if you're a large enough company, that it can get, well into the hundreds of millions if you're big enough, but more likely in the tens of millions area. And the only limiting factor that we have is not the amount of cases or really the data being digested. It's more that we need to make sure in the pre-processing aspect of this that we can bring in a clean event log. So what a clean event log means is it's not too complex. You've bucketed your steps, so they're not, it's not just thousands upon thousands of different kinds of steps. You want to have some general aspect to it so that you're not creating like all these tiny minute steps like, okay, you know, like we've sent this to manufacturing with plant 17 and that's like the step name. You would just say sent to manufacturing, remove the plant name and add that as an attribute.
Sure.
So the variance is what causes any kind of like slowdown that we would have in these.
Robert,
And
I have a question.
go ahead.
I just had a question around that variant. So if you go through a set of steps, my scenario would be we have a customer of reoccurring orders. And they may change over time. It would just be like 2 or 3 steps. Can you look at reoccurring? So this customer over the past year, frequency of those processes, wouldn't that just be like an activity name? There's a timestamp of what that activity is.
Could you, I'm sorry, could you restate the beginning? I didn't quite hear the beginning of your question.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward, right? You have a case ID, it's a unique identifier. For example, it would be a customer, and then the activity name would be, you know, shipment, maybe a quantity or whatever, and then it would be reoccurring. So some customers order every other week, some order once a month, some order every other day. You see what I'm getting at? So each one of those customers would be unique. So if they, as long as they fell within this data structure, this activity log, you should be able to track it in this model, correct? Is that?
Yep, that's
okay.
Exactly correct.
So the model's pretty simple. I mean, is that model part of the BAF product, or is that something that's done in the model itself?
It's, I would say it's a natural extension of process mining. I know there's slightly different data models out there for process mining, but I agree it's rather simple. And while we do call it our PathNow data model, again, I would say it's a pretty natural extension of process mining because you really, if you have those 3 steps, you can display those 3 pieces of data, you can display your process. So you're absolutely right that it is pretty simple. Everything else is not extraneous. It's just information that will be processed in a slightly different way or can be fluid. So you don't need to have the same attributes on every case that you upload to something like this.
Right, that's powerful. It's great. Good stuff. It's taking the complex and moving it to a simple activity log, which, I mean, as long as it's clean, right, and you set it up right, should work. Okay.
Exactly.
Robert, we got a couple questions. It says, first is how much data is behind this model? And then how much is the cost of the suite?
Sure. So as far as data, I'll answer that first. We just take customers' data. So we don't take it. I don't want to say that. We use customers' data in their own environments is how we work with this. So as far as the data, it really just depends on who's using these. Obviously, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the fact that Power BI can be slow if you get really, really high in the data, but it doesn't really do anything to slow down our visuals unless it's that one aspect I talked about where if you get in like several 100,000 variants, then you're going to have a slowdown because that causes so many branching possibilities that our Process Explorer has a difficult time. But that's just kind of like a regular complexity issue. As far as the price, that's something that I am not as familiar with. I think Daniel Hughes, my associate who was going to talk actually, is in the chat and he can answer that if he wants, but I also don't want to, I want to respect any rules there are here about like talking about price and stuff. So just let me know.
Sure, go. They had the question, so feel free to answer it how you can. Or if you've got a link, sounds like there's interest, feel free to put a link in the chat for people to go for more info.
Exactly. Sure.
I found your blog from PathNow and I was going to paste it in, but if you've got a better link.
Yeah, if Daniel's still here, I'm sure he's got a better link. Otherwise, Jenny, if you're here, I think you should be here. Could you post something in here, like our product page?
Yeah, absolutely. We also have a free visual, which I can send a link to if you're interested in taking a look at that as well.
Great.
Robert, Robert, I have a question about capacity, and I assume this is a live connection, and Can you talk to the capacity and what you guys have handled from basically the live stream of the process data?
Sure. So, sorry, I'm thinking on how to answer that. So we've handled a wide variety of process data. So our most common one being an SAP connection. So with that, we can make it very easily live because we have a standard process that we suggest with an exporter from SAP into SQL Server. And that's where we do our backend transformations. And generally, the reason we kind of offload that onto SQL Server is to handle those really, really like millions of rows and stuff. So I would say, as far as the actual data, I want to get this right. So it can be pretty much any amount of data you want, because when we do that processing to create the event log, it really just comes down to complexity of your process variance. So that can be anywhere like upwards of, it can be like 10 gigabytes that you're going into SQL with, and bring it down. Generally, we'll bring it down to just like one or so. And that's kind of where we like to live in with enterprise data, at least. When you start getting into like, much farther than 1 gigabyte of data, at least in Power BI, it starts to slow it down significantly. So we try to live in that 1 to 2 range in terms of what's actually on Power BI itself. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. That was really something.
Yeah. Thank you so much for allowing me to present.
You are very welcome. And we're going to go back to. All right. Everybody see the the slideshow. All right. Now coming up next, this slide kind of is a good introduction for Marcus. Is it possible?
Well, you're just attacking Tableau today. Hopefully there's not a bunch of people who love Tableau in the audience.
It's easy for me because I've never used it. I don't know what it is. I don't care about it. So our next presenter, Marcus, has been with us a couple of times making presentations. Yes. And he has agreed to do a presentation for a beginner level deal. Talk about this DAX stuff. So Marcus, you are all set. Take her away.
Woo.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Can you guys see my screen? I'm going to share momentarily here.
Not yet. Still waiting. Turning black. There we go.
We're there.
Okay. So thanks everybody for staying on. There were some great presentations so far today. Thank you to all from the Titletown user group for allowing me to present. And as Paul had mentioned, diving into some introductory level concepts around DAX and Power Query today. So if you're still a little intimidated by those two languages or that part of Power BI, hopefully after today's presentation, that'll ease your fears, I guess, with that and have you feeling more confident in the data modeling side within Power BI. So with that, just a quick introduction. As mentioned, I do work at Skyline Technologies. I've been there for almost 3 years now. Have over 5 years of experience in the data analytics space, so relatively still new in this industry, so to speak, but learning every day. And my focus has been the Microsoft SQL stack, Power Platform, specifically Power BI, and the Azure Stack. Feel free to follow me on social media. I post quite a bit on LinkedIn. That's my profile link there, and also every once in a while on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. So for the presentation today, there's not going to be a whole lot of slides. I'm going to lay out a few here with both Power Query and DAX, but the majority of today's presentation is going to be in the demo within Power BI Desktop. So with that, we're going to do a little introduction on how DAX and Power Query play together within Power BI and where both are used. We'll then get started with Power Query, go over the concepts that I'm going to cover in the demo, and then also cover some tips and best practices that I would recommend utilizing when creating your Power Queries and bringing data in. Then we'll come back, we'll do a few more slides with DAX, getting started with that. Some tips and best practices around creating your DAX measures and organizing those and writing those. If we have some additional time at the end, we will even jump into some third-party tools that can help performance tune and design your DAX queries. And then we will end with any questions that you have. I will try and answer questions as they come through in the chat. Feel free to stop me if we start getting a few of them and want to take a good break point at some point. So,
excellent.
With that, hopefully this slide kind of gives you an overview of kind of how the process works with Power BI and where Power Query and DAX fall in with the order of operations when refreshing your Power BI file, your PBIX file. Okay, so first of all, you're going to start out with the Power Query side of things. That is going to be your ingestion tool for Power BI. It's also the same engine used in Analysis Services 2019 or newer, or Azure Analysis Services. So and I should clarify on the SSAS or the on-premise side, that is for tabular models, if you're using tabular modeling. The engine behind the scenes here is known as the VertiPack engine. Okay, so any data modeling techniques that you would use for tabular modeling and analysis services is going to apply for best practices in Power BI. You'll also see that used in data flows. Okay, so that's kind of a feature that's been added relatively recently within Power BI in the last year or two, and is adding features every day as the online service, self-service ETL feature within Power BI. And you're even starting to see Power Query used in other Power Platform data flows, Azure Data Factory, in terms of they're calling those wrangling data flows. And even more recently through Azure, the release of Azure Synapse, you're seeing data flows appear in there. And essentially that is all using this VertiPack engine and the Power Query language with that. So not only being familiar with Power Query and how that works can benefit you in Power BI, but if you're using some of these other Azure tools here, that skill set transfers over to those as well. Excuse me. So in terms of order of operations here, that Power Query is gonna process in the storage engine piece of the VertiPack process flow. We'll say it's really divided up into two parts. You have the storage engine and you have the formula engine. The storage engine is going to be for that Power Query. It's going to be that first step of data ingestion. And then secondly is going to be your formula engine or DAX side of things, which you can see here on the right. DAX, for those of you that don't know, stands for Data Analytical Expressions. And with the DAX language, you're able to create calculations such as calculated tables, columns, and measures in your Power BI data set and report. So in a summary here, in terms of what gets processed in your Power BI file, okay, your Power Query tables are going to go first. That's going to be the first step of the refresh, so to speak. Okay, next is going to be your calculated tables. So any calculated tables that you create through DAX are going to be next, followed by calculated columns, and finally with your DAX measures or expressions there at the end. Okay, so that's in order of operations. And as we go on here in the demo, we're going to see, there's often a negotiation that you have to decide on in terms of where to place different objects in your data modeling. Do you want them to go all the way back to your relational source database, maybe in a view layer, some kind of SQL object, for example? Do you want to have them live in the Power Query layer, okay, and do your transformation there? Do you want to have them exist in your DAX layer in terms of doing maybe some calculated tables on the fly? And that's all part of the planning process that comes into play with building your Power BI data model. So with that, moving into an intro into Power Query, some of the things we're going to cover in the demo here, we're going to go over some of the UI. To be honest, I use the UI often in Power Query. I wouldn't say I can sit down and write 25 to 50 lines of Power Query code. I'd say I know enough to be dangerous, and I'll talk through some of that in terms of the advanced editor, where you can see the Power Query code behind the scenes of what's going on behind the UI here. And I will say, as I'm going through the demo, oftentimes there are multiple ways to do the same function within the Power Query UI. So they give you somewhat of a shortcut menu, and then they also give you an option up in the ribbons at the top within the Power Query editor. We're going to go through date value extraction, a very powerful feature within Power Query that you're able to take a date timestamp and essentially parse that out without needing to know any kind of code, and be able to parse that out into the different date and time values within your data set. Conditional and custom columns, we'll go through a couple of examples of that, how to create those. We'll talk about merges, which in the T-SQL world would be the same as your joins. So if you're writing a T-SQL query and you're doing some table joins, this merge functionality acts in the same way. And then finally, in terms of features, going to end with implementing parameters and showing some value that if it applies in your organization, you may be able to take advantage of using that, and why these may become even more important as Power BI continues to integrate source control methods into their product, which many of you may know right now is still a little bit lacking, but through things like deployment pipelines with Power BI Premium, they are bridging the gap in that space. And then on top of demoing some of those things I just touched on there, we're going to talk about some best practices that I have found when using Power Query. These first two here, in general, those are just great things to do for your data model. Okay, they're going to compress your data model size, and they're going to remove a lot of the noise that oftentimes comes in on reports. Having columns in your data set that really have no reporting value or aren't going to be used by your end users. Next here, splitting high cardinality columns if applicable. So you can think of the word cardinality as uniqueness. Okay, so the more unique rows that you have in a table, okay, the less that the Vertipack engine behind the scenes is going to be able to compress that data and reduce your model size and reduce the time it would take in your DAX queries to return results in your visualizations. I'm going to show you the value of grouping similar steps together. So within Power Query, for example, you can rename column names, or you can remove columns, or you can split columns. If you're doing a lot of these steps multiple times, instead of spacing them out and doing them multiple times, you want to try and group them together, okay, to reduce the number of operations happening in your Power Query. So I'll get into that in the demo. This query folding one is ultra important if you're using relational database sources such as SQL. And essentially what this feature allows you to do is to push the processing back to that relational database source. So I'm going to show you in the demo here how you can identify if your Power Query is query folding and to take advantage of that, because that is really important in terms of speeding up your refresh times if you're using a relational database source such as Oracle or SQL or something along those lines there. And then finally, using comments. So not only can you include comments in a step that if somebody else is doing development on this file, but you can also rename steps. So within the UI, Power Query gives you a default name for that step. Okay, you can rename the step to be more specific to actually what it's doing. So like if you're filtering a column, Power Query will just call the step filter column, but you can actually change that step to say I'm filtering column XYZ for this specific value. So if somebody ever had to come in to your file, they could quickly see that step name and go, oh, that's what they're doing there, instead of actually having to physically go into the details or look at the advanced editor for that. Nicole, you had a question on query folding for MDX, I think. So the query, since that's a direct query for analysis services, query folding wouldn't apply necessarily for that. I should have clarified better. Query folding is for import data sets. Okay, so those that you'd have to schedule a refresh for. So that feature necessarily wouldn't apply for that.
So no live connections.
No live connections, no.
Okay.
Any other comments on the slides? Otherwise, I'm going to jump into the demo for the Power Query side of things here.
We had a larger question. I don't know if you got it up to where you can read it, but it's from, it says Power/mQuery questions. Say you have two different data sets in your Power BI. For example, one database source like SQL Server, but the other is a flat file Excel CSV. Can you add a custom column in one of them, Power BI, for like a conditional lookup onto the other source to copy/assign a specific value to that custom column? I know you can merge join to create a third data set within Power BI, but any other option otherwise? Thanks.
Sure. So I believe with the question here, we're saying they have two separate data set files. So essentially you'd be connecting to published data sets here. Is that the scenario, or are we talking about 2 or 3 separate data sources within one Power BI file?
Rahul, can you expand?
Because there's a little bit different approach to each, but both are doable, especially with December's release of composite models being available over Power BI datasets and analysis services. So, but it does depend on the scenario there.
He's not responding at the moment. We will come back to it at the end.
Okay. Yeah, if he ends up posting something, we can touch base on that later on here. All right. So with that, I'm going to hop into my Power BI file. Can you guys see a Power BI desktop screen here?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to head into my Power Query editor, which is the transform data button there, right here on the home ribbon. Okay, so with that, just doing a little bit of a UI overview here. On your home ribbon, okay, you're going to have a number of options here. I talked about within the UI, there's oftentimes multiple ways to do the same thing, or multiple options. And what I mean by that is, for example, here, I have a customer dimension table. I could click remove column on that. And for example, now I have a removed column step here in my applied steps. Within those applied steps, I could delete that by clicking that X button there and see that reappeared. Also, if I right click on the zip code column, okay, you'll see that the remove column option is there as well. So that's just one of many examples within the UI here where you have an example, or you have an option, a transformation option in the ribbons up at the top here, or by right clicking, hey, you often have a quick pick option as well that includes a lot of these transformations. So that's an example of getting used to that, and really it becomes down to developer preference on which one you'd like to get comfortable using. The next piece to cover in the UI here that I want to touch on is the advanced editor, and it's in the home ribbon here at the top. This shows you the Power Query behind the scenes of what's happening in your transformations. So if I open that up, hey, the standard format for Power Query language is it's always going to start with a let here. Okay, so it's going to start with the word let, and then it's going to list each of your steps line by line. So each step in your Power Query is going to be a separate line item. And then at the end, it's going to end with an in, and it's always going to list the last step that is in your Power Query underneath the let statement. So it's going to start with let, it's going to list all of your steps here, and then it's going to end with that last step that's been defined in your query. Now, a couple things to note. The nice thing about this, the advanced editor and what appears in the applied steps here, and I'm going to hop back into it here shortly, but you can see that there are names for your applied steps. And I mentioned that you can rename those steps. You can custom rename them, or custom put custom text in. And you can right click on a step and change that text there. That text is mimicked inside the advanced editor to the left of your equal sign for each step. Okay, so you'll see step number 1, okay, is source. Okay, step number 2 is dim customer, which will show as navigation. Okay, so for actually pulling objects or selecting objects from SQL in this example, okay, that would be the only one that's not matching in text. Okay, but if I show an example of changing the step name, okay, let's say I change it to actually list my column here. So in the step, I'm changing the column zip code to text. Okay, but the default Power Query step just said changed type. change data type. Well, now I've changed this text to actually read, give a more descriptive text of what I'm doing. So I say change zip code to text. And in my advanced editor, if I pop back out to there, okay, you'll see that that dynamically changed. So even if you don't know how to write Power Query, and I'll be the first to admit I know a few functions, but I can't go in here and write this all from scratch. Like I said, I use the UI a lot, and I think the UI is great in terms of being interactive and somewhat easy to use. But this is an example how, by adding some additional descriptors, if you're working on a file with multiple developers or analysts, this can go a long way in telling them what's already been done in the file. Hey, the next thing I want to talk through is date extraction. So being able to take a date value and extract the different parts from that date or a timestamp if that is part of your column as well. Okay, and to do that, you could do it a couple of different ways. Okay, one way would be is if you wanted to keep the date value in your query, okay, you could click duplicate column here. Okay, so by doing that, by right clicking, okay, you could add that column. Here's another example of having two different ways to do that. Oftentimes by habit, I do the right click, the quick pick method. But if I went to the add column area at the top, there's a duplicate column. So as long as the right column is selected, I hit duplicate column. Okay, it produces that duplicate or copied column here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that last one because I only want to have one duplicated column here. One thing to note that there is no undo button in the Power Query editor. So be careful when deleting steps. You can't just hit Control Z or find an undo button here because that doesn't exist. One thing I have developed as a best practice, kind of skipping ahead to that, if you are worried about losing any work when you're starting in the Power Query editor, one thing you could do is initially, if you're opening up a file that somebody else created or worked on, you could go into your advanced editor for that query, copy that out, paste it into some kind of text editor before you start working on it. That way you have kind of the starting point in case you accidentally delete a step and you want to revert back to that. That technique also works out very well with those of you using data flows. Because what you can do is you can actually test out some additional functionality that's in Power BI Desktop that isn't in the Power BI Service Data Flow Editor. Even though it's the same Power Query language, some of the features in the desktop haven't made their way to the service yet in that Data Flows Editor. So you can actually still use all the features that are available in the desktop in the service. And you can use the full UI, so to speak, in the desktop. So an example of that would be you could do all of your transformation steps in the desktop, go into the advanced editor, copy this code out, put it into a text editor somewhere or in your clipboard there, and paste it directly into a data flow in the online service. And that's a quick way to essentially get some extra features that wouldn't be available through the UI in the service from the desktop here. Sorry, that went into a little bit longer tangent. Back to the the date parsing here. So after I've made my date copy, I can right click on that date copied column. And if you go down to the transform option here, okay, you'll notice that it recognizes it as a date formatted column, and you can pick a number of different options from each of the levels of that date value. Okay, so year, quarter, month, week, day. Okay, or some text transforms that aren't necessarily date related. Those would be standard with any transform you could do on a column. But with date, you get these additional options here. So I'm going to go ahead and just, for example, I'll select end of quarter. Okay, so what I can do here is I can also add a additional step to rename my column. And you'll see I have a renamed column step here. If I wanted to be more specific, I could rename that, or in the properties, if you right click on a step and it will open up a properties box, you could say I renamed my date copy column to end of quarter, for example. So you could actually write out what the Power Query step is. And by doing that, it will prompt a new icon on that step. A tooltip if you hover over it, or it'll indicate that if you open up the properties, you can go in and read what somebody's comment is. So that kind of leads into my one of my other best practices from the slide of using comments, especially on more complex steps that you're doing in your data transformation that may help somebody else out. Or refresh your own memory if it's been a while since you've been in that Power BI file. For the demo here, I do not have the other Teams window open, so if there are questions coming in, feel free to stop me there. Hey, the other thing, the next thing that I want to introduce in the Power Query window is conditional or custom columns. Okay, so this is another thing to keep in mind is the next piece of the presentation is around DAX, and you can create calculated columns through DAX. But quite frankly, if unless that calculation is needed, unless that calculation is needed to be done after the loading of your data, I would recommend any calculated columns be done on either the source database side, such as SQL in a view, or within your Power Query layer, because that's then going to push the processing of that back either to your relational database source or to the Power Query engine, which isn't going to affect the return or the response time on your DAX calculations. So your visuals won't be affected by that, because all of that processing is done on the Power Query or on the relational database or your source database side. Okay, so that kind of comes into that discussion of where do I put things. You know, I have a number of these options on where to create the calculation. If at all possible, push everything back to your database side or the Power Query side. And I understand in some of your situations, you may not have access to the database side, and it may take you know, an abnormally long time to get that request answered by your IT department or your BI team in your organization. If that's the case, I would highly suggest doing it in this Power Query layer here. So what I mean by that is, first we're going to create a conditional column. Okay, so to find that option, you can go to the Add Column ribbon here at the top. And I'm actually going to do the column from examples first here. So that's the option on the left. And what that does is, with your column selected that you want to do that from, you can start typing in the text that you want to extract from that column. So for example, in the product column, I don't want to extract anything after the word Blackstone. I just want to extract the word Blackstone here. Okay, if I just start typing in Blackstone, it will recognize that essentially treats the space as a delimiter and only pulls out the word Blackstone from that column. Another example could be if I go to product type here and I start typing outdoor, because I only want that word to come back instead of the combined outdoor and patio. Okay, I can just start typing outdoor and it will treat this slash and space as a delimiter. It will recognize that. So you can see as I'm scrolling down, okay, these other product types don't have that split. Okay, you'll see living room is spaced out. Okay, so it only pulls in the word living. Okay, so that's one way to create what's called a column from examples. So it could be helpful if you have a common delimiter or common spacing in your data set or your table that you're bringing in there. I'm gonna go ahead and cancel that. Okay, the other thing you can create is a conditional column. Okay, so oftentimes for this, if you want to create some type of categorical column that if the value meets this condition, then I want to give it a yes or a 1. If it doesn't meet that condition, then I want to give it a no or a 0 in terms of reporting purposes. So I'm going to go ahead here and create one off a category and click conditional column. Okay, what that does is that brings up this menu here. I'm going to say I want to create a column that I only want to bring back the products that are in the category mix. So I'm going to say, I'm going to call this column mix, yes or no. So then in my column name, I'm going to pick category. If that equals mix, okay, then give me a Y, else give me a no or an N. Okay, and through that conditional logic, okay, you can see that my new column is created with all N or Y's and N's. Okay, sorry. Is there a comment there?
I think you're good.
Okay. So you may pick Y or N. You may use 1 or 0. Okay, either or would get you that type of conditional column there. If I want to edit that step, let's say I go in and originally create the condition. Okay, any step with a gear icon to the right of it here, so you'll see a gear next to my added conditional column. Okay, prompts open that menu there. Okay, if it doesn't have a gear, that means the UI doesn't produce a pop-up window here, and you either have to adjust the step, such as renaming a column, or go into the advanced editor or the expression bar here and adjust the step through that. Okay, the next one is merged queries. Okay, so merging or joining your tables together in Power Query is possible. Okay, again, I would suggest writing those merges if you need that in your relational database source, such as T-SQL, or I should say SQL Server using T-SQL. But if you do not have access to that, or that's not a feasible ask, then using this merge query option will give you that functionality of using joins. So even though in my dimensional model, my simple dimensional model here, I'm going to eventually leave these tables as is. Let's say I had a request to join in a date value onto my sales table, for example. Okay, so I want to pull one of these date attributes. Okay, let's say I want to pull in that end of quarter conditional column or column from example that I got here. So I can go ahead and take my sales table. Okay, I can click on that merge query option here. I can click on my date table and my common primary key here is going to be the date value. Okay, so underneath here, okay, you'll notice the join kind. Okay, that terminology looks very similar to T-SQL. Okay, you have your outers, your inner joins. Okay, and you also have a fuzzy matching option here. Okay, so if you're bringing in some less formatted or raw data, okay, from your data source, okay, fuzzy matching might be an option that you're doing a join on. So that's available in the merge as well. Okay, in this case, I'm just going to use a inner join here just to give me my matches, and I'm going to go ahead and merge that. And this is proving to be a good example of, you know, even with a 10 million row table, okay, doing your merge, okay, within Power Query could take some time. Okay, so either, again, going back and filtering. Okay, so what I could do here is I could go back before this merge step. Okay, and I could put a date filter, okay, on this. Let's say in my date filter, I'm going to insert a step, and I'm going to say, okay, I want this to be, this is some fake data here. So I'm going to say, I think it goes through 2017. Let me get everything after the 1st of 2016, okay, on or equal to. Okay, so now I have that filter. I could rename that. Okay, greater than or equal to 1/1/2016. Okay, so now I have that custom step that shows up in my advanced editor, okay, in that exact text. Okay, and now with my merge queries, I'm going to get far less rows, okay, that are being merged in that join here. Okay, so that should finish a lot quicker than it was going to before here.
Marcus, did you say that you had 10 million rows of data here?
Yeah, in my example sales table here, I have a roughly just over 10 million rows, yes.
Maybe in the next version of Power BI, we ask for the feature that if it's going to take more than 15 seconds to do these things, that we get the Jeopardy music that kicks in.
Well, after that filter, that went pretty quick. That was just under 2 million that joined in. So after your merge queries here, you'll notice that the table you were merging to or joining to appears here, and it appears in a hyperlinked format. And you'll notice that this split arrow icon at the top here, okay, this will show you all of the columns from your join table that you can bring in. So I mentioned that I wanted to bring in my end of quarter column from that date. Okay, you can pick to use the original column name as a prefix. I usually leave that unchecked because it just adds unnecessary text to my column, but you could leave that on. Okay, and that's expanding, so that's simply bringing the value over on the matches. Okay, you could also choose to aggregate. Okay, so you could bring over an aggregate of matches from that join as well. Okay, so either or with that join. Okay, and after that, you could see that I merged, I expanded. Okay, and now in my sales table, okay, I have that end of quarter column for those rows. Okay, so that would be an example of doing a SQL join through the Power Query UI here. The last feature I want to touch into before I close out the Power Query section with the rest of the best practices is utilizing parameters. So often with relational database sources, you are switching environments between a dev, a test, or a production, or some variation of those environment setups. Through parameters, okay, you can actually make that publishing or maintenance of files a little bit easier for yourself. Okay, so instead of having to manage a separate dev, test, or prod file, okay, you could manage one file and use parameters in that file and either keep it in a PBIX format, or you could export it as a Power BI template file. Okay, so either or with that. To set that up, okay, you go to this Manage Parameters area here. And you can see that I already have two parameters in place, one named server and one named database. Okay, so this first one here, I have the name server listed. I have it as a text data type. You can define that there. And I have that plugged in for my sample database and server here. Similarly, I have database, text data type, and my demo database plugged in for the value. Now, how do we implement these parameters into my queries? Well, you can either set the parameters up first and then do that before you create your connection to your tables, views, or other SQL objects there. Or after you've done that, you can go back and switch it, okay, by going back to the source step here and clicking on the gear icon. So by default, when you make your original connection, okay, you will have the text option, okay, and you will have to enter in your server and database information like I've done here. Okay, so that's the step. Okay, notice how nothing changed. Okay, I have my server and database parameters set up. So now if I go back and on the left, I hit the drop down here, okay, I can select parameter. And I can select my server in the server line and database in the database line and hit OK. Okay, notice how in the expression area at the top, okay, my hard-coded values were replaced with those parameter names. Okay, and I'm going to take you out to the Power BI service quickly to show that once that is published, okay, the impact that that can have in your report management here. Okay, so I'm going to head out. I have a Power BI service window open. Okay, you'll see here I have the Titletown demo file published, which is the same file I had open on the desktop with those two parameters. If I go into the dataset settings, okay, you'll notice that you may have seen this parameter option here. And if I expand that, of course it is lagging here, but eventually I will see a drop down for server and database for those options in my file. So essentially you can have the same Power BI report file. Okay, you can see that here, database and server. You can have the same report file between your dev, test, and prod environments. Okay, and through using parameters, you can publish that file to the appropriate workspace in your organization and simply change the parameter values in the service to have it refresh against the correct data source. Okay, so that way you don't need to manage 3 separate files or 4 separate files or however many environments you have set up. You can manage that one file and adjust the data source on the fly, so to speak. And that's, if you've used deployment pipelines for Power BI Premium, that's essentially how that's working with your pipeline rules that you can set up and specify the different values through the environments. Any questions so far on any of these features that I've shown within Power Query?
Nothing in the chat. Going once, going twice. All right.
Okay. I've already covered a couple of best practices as showing some of these features.
Hey, Marcus, I got one real quick.
Sure.
On what you just touched on. So if you're using parameters to manage the connections, how would you, if you only have one file, how do you manage changes that are currently in development that haven't been pushed to production if someone else finds a change or something that's in production right now that's having an issue?
Changes on the data source side or in your Power BI report file?
In the report file. So I know with the parameters, you're specifying how to connect to it. But if you're actually in development with new features or in UAT with new features and you're doing one file, how do you manage something that needs to come up for maybe an immediate change or a bug that was pushed based on your last release?
It's a good question. Again, there's
outside of pipelines. Yeah.
Sure. There's not a perfect source control option right now for Power BI report files. What I would suggest in that scenario is, ensuring that the changes that you're testing are only pushed to the service in those test environments versus your production workspace and apps that the latest report file that's been pushed there is fully tested. So essentially, that latest version is pushed there. At Skyline, oftentimes with Power BI projects, if the client does not have a preference, we do like using the OneDrive folder. That manages up to 100 versions of that file copy. So if we ever had to revert back to a previous version and republish that to a specific environment, we could do that. It's not a perfect solution just due to some limitations that are out there right now with PBIX files and your typical source control tools that integrate with things such as Git and so forth. So,
sure.
Not a perfect answer probably, but as it sits right now, that's there will be some manual management still. I don't know if I've come across a fully automated deployment process with Power BI files yet. There's been some workaround solutions that I've seen out there with Azure DevOps, and then obviously if you have premium through deployment pipelines, but even with those, you are still having to go in and actually click, the buttons to advance, your Power BI objects throughout the different environments. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, they're getting there. They're starting to bridge the gap in that area, but I haven't seen anything that's fully automated to this point. Any questions or anything else on that, on the parameter topic there?
All right.
Cool. So just finishing up best practices here. We touched on removing unused columns. Okay, so any columns that aren't going to be used either for your relationships between your tables in your data model, or for reporting purposes, either creating measures or slicing and dicing your data through attributes. Okay, you want to get rid of those because any additional columns are only going to add to the memory of your report file. Okay, you want to filter your data set as I showed with my outstanding bad example here. If your data set's large and you're doing something like a join here, okay, that's going to take a decent amount of time to do. But after I added that filter where I only brought in the certain date range that I wanted to on my table, okay, that sped things up quite a bit and will also speed up your DAX calculations based on the size of your data set. Okay, you're going to want to split high cardinality columns. And from before, the word cardinality means unique or uniqueness. Okay, so the more unique columns you have, or unique values, I should say, you have in your column, the less the VertiPack engine is going to be able to compress that data in your data set. Okay, so for example, if I were to change this to a even though there's only date values here, if I were to change this to a date timestamp formatted column, okay, it doesn't have any actual time values, but it adds the standard midnight 12 a.m. as the timestamp. Okay, what I could do here, I'm just going to get rid of that those other steps I did before. Okay, let's say I want to split this out. Okay, and let's say I want to split it by the delimiter of a space, and I just want to do it from the left space, so it's not going to do it again after the 12 a.m. I could do that. Okay, so you can see now I have date 1 versus date 2. Okay, the reason you'd want to do this, unless you know the requirement from the business that you're building the report from requires you to have the date time as one column. Okay, you want to split that out because again, it can't the way that it stores data in columnar format, it can't compress those values together with essentially having a unique value for every row with timestamps. Now in this example, okay, you're only going to have one value as the time because I just manually added that in here. But let's say your data set, you were bringing in date time, you would have a number of unique values that would be difficult to compress in that column. So if possible, if you need to keep timestamp around as an example, okay, you may want to think about splitting that out into its own separate column in the data set. It's going to compress much better when you're loading that data in as opposed to keeping it together as one column. The last one I want to touch on is query folding. And I had mentioned that is a really big feature to keep in mind when using import dataset connections, as well as a relational database source such as SQL or Oracle or something along those lines. Okay, how you can tell if it's query folding is by right-clicking on your step here, and you'll notice this option towards the bottom, View Native Query. If that option is not grayed out, hey, you know that you are query folding. And if I click on that View Native Query, okay, it will produce, in this case, a SQL statement, because that is my data source for this for these tables. It will produce a SQL statement that would look pretty familiar here, a select statement from my fax sales table. You'll notice as I go down, okay, further in my query, okay, some of these actions that I've performed, such as this split column, okay, are not able to be query folded. Okay, so you'll see that later down in my steps, okay, this View Native Query is grayed out. So with that in mind, okay, you may not always be able to keep every single Power Query step. You may need to do things that aren't translatable to your native database language in the Power Query editor. I would advise you to do those later down in your applied steps as opposed to earlier. The more steps you can do in and have query folded back to your data source, the better performance you're going to get with your data load. Okay, so you can see here my filtered rows. Okay, that's able to be translated, okay, in my native query here. Okay, so that's okay. My change type step, okay, also able to be translated, but this split column, okay, isn't. So what I might want to do here, since this change type I know worked up here before the split column, okay, I may want to change this type as well up here and combine that step together, okay, as opposed to it happening after. Now, in this case, it's changing the type of columns that happen after the split column. Okay, so obviously that's not able to be done here because I don't have that column existing. So there are scenarios where you may rename a column in step 3 or 4, and then in step 8 you may rename a column again. If possible, you want to group those rename steps together, okay, to save the number of steps in your Power Query and ultimately save you processing time on the back end to refresh your data. So I know that was a lot. Any questions on what I covered with Power Query, or any questions that I didn't go over that maybe you had with Power Query?
Feel free to type your questions in the chat. We'll get them to Marcus, or unmute now if you feel you can ask a question. I don't think we have a lot of people trying to do that at once. Go ahead.
Yeah, Marcus?
Yeah.
I got a question regarding the, I just have an issue that I'm looking at converting to different time zones. The data get into the system, and I'm comparing to, say, today or now, which has a date time, 2 different time zones. Is there a way to convert from one time zone to another?
Great question, and that's a tricky scenario.
Yeah.
There are Power Query functions that allow you to convert. I don't have them off the top of my head, but if you look up Power Query time zone, you could write a custom column to convert that, or you can change your column type. You could change your date timestamp to date time zone. Okay, so you could do a change type to a time zone format as an example. The thing to keep in mind with this, because this is where it gets tricky, is the time zone in Power BI Desktop is going to auto-generate off your local machine. Okay, so wherever the physical location of your IP address is on your local machine, that's the time zone that it's going to put into your data set. The tricky part becomes when you publish to the Power BI service, it adopts the time zone that your Power BI tenant is in. Okay, so it changes it when you go to the service. It's a tricky data set or data type conversion scenario there. So just keep that in mind if you're dealing with time zones in your date times there.
Okay, no, thanks. That's a good question, actually. We're just trying to align on the same time zone, right? Because from one system, it could be put in.
Yep.
I'm looking at milestones, so from one time to another, and if there are 2 different time zones, it's causing negative values from the difference between 2 dates. So this might actually work. Actually, thanks.
Yep.
All right. One of the questions that was in the chat was related to Power MQuery. Say you have 2 different data sets. For one case, one's an SQL server and the other is a flat file, CSV. Can you add a custom column in one of them for a conditional lookup onto the other source to copy, assign a specific value to that custom column? Now, I know you can merge join to create a 3rd data set within Power BI, but is there any other option?
So you could do a merge join. Okay, so that would be actually doing it in one data set within Power Query here. The other option would be you could do a DAX calculation, a calculated column, where you could use either the user relationship function or the along with the related function to create a relationship in the calculation there between your 2 columns, assuming that they can be joined together. I should make note the user relationship would activate an inactive relationship in your data model. So let's say in the role-playing dimension world, you know, you have one date table and it has multiple relationships, but only one can be active. The ones that aren't active, to activate those in your DAX calculations, you have to use a user relationship function. But otherwise, you could also, things that aren't related from a physical relationship, you could use a DAX related function to join those in your calculation. But I would be wary of that due to potential performance issues, but that is an option.
Sure, and that sounds like similar to doing the merge join to bring them together. You're having to operate based on a join. You know, in the case
Correct.
You're doing in DAX with some relationships, or you're doing it in Power Query M by doing a merge join. I'm curious, Joshy, you asked the question, what is the problem with doing the join as part of this? That seems to be a fairly straightforward way that you'd bring two completely different table sources together, and then you'd do a calculated column. What's the problem with a merge join? Wonder if he can say. Maybe he's typing it. Give him a second. If not,
and that kind of goes to the trade-off again of where you want to put your processing. Do you want to put it on the formula engine side, where you may have to continually repeat that in a calculated column with every visual that column would touch, either in a measure that's being shown or the attribute itself? Or do you want to put that on the refresh time of your data set, which I would recommend that to push it to that side of things, and have it be done there. So hopefully if the concern from the way the question is phrased is that you basically are creating a third data set. Oh, let's see here. Sure. So I have a case where if you find a value, copy that. And if not, set that column to a fixed value other than null or blank. Sure. So that, to me, that sounds like in the Power Query side of things, that sounds like that conditional column example. Okay, so in this example here, let's say my other table, let's say my other table in my data set, we already did a join to product, and now I have that other column in here in my table. I could do some type of conditional column saying that if it equaled the value, put a yes or a no, or a 1 or a 0. If not, make it the opposite there.
The key is you still do need to perform the join at some point so that you can
Correct.
say, oh, I'm looking this up, and if it's not there, that's fine. But you do need to perform the join and then have the calculated column that says, oh, okay, this is the result that it found from the other
Correct.
table.
There's also a lookup value function in DAX that could be part of that as well. It's very similar to VLOOKUP for Excel users. It acts in the same way. DAX.
That might be something to check out.
That's one and the same there.
Good. I think we answered his question. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute real quick. I don't think we have a ton of people trying, or type your question in.
If not, I'm gonna keep rolling here because I think we're getting kind of towards the end. I had a lot more content in DAX, but I'm not sure we're gonna have a ton of time to do that. Do we know kind of what the stop is here, Paul?
We are scheduled to go till 5, but typically we've had time to end early, but we had a lot of presentations before you, so I'd like to let you finish out what you can, but we do want to respect people's time and quit by 5. Yep.
So let's maybe go till at least 4:45 here, and then we'll see where we're at. Okay. All right. With that, I'm gonna hop back to my slide deck here. Okay, so after Power Query, we get into our data set and actually creating our data model and modeling out our data, excuse me. organizing that, creating measures, calculations, and so forth. Okay, so a couple of concepts I'm going to touch into with DAX that I think are important, especially when getting started out, is evaluation context. Okay, so with evaluation context, we're going to go into two different areas there. We're going to go into row context and filter context, okay, as a part of that overall DAX evaluation. From there, we're going to jump into what are called iterator functions. Okay, some examples of that you may have used before would be a sum x function or a average x function. Okay, and those types of functions literally iterate over your row by row detail and perform a calculation on that row context level of the evaluation. Okay, so again, starting at the top here with evaluation kind of leads into the rest of these types of function examples, and this by no means covers every area of DAX, but these are some areas that I think are really important when getting started out with DAX. Next is the filter context, which is the other piece of that evaluation context. And a good example of this is using the all clause and seeing the effect that has on your result set in your DAX expression. From there, looking at a few things in terms of DAX syntax, using variables to keep your DAX clean, kind of clean it up there, and then calculate, okay, how to use that, where to use that, some examples there, and then if we have time, some time intelligence examples within DAX as well. Some best practices within DAX. So what I'll be showing in the demo here, along with those different areas, are you want to qualify column names in your DAX expressions, but you do not want to qualify measures. Okay, so what I mean by that is, and I'll show some examples here in my Power BI file, qualified names will list the table name, sometimes surrounded by single quotes, and then in brackets, it will have your column name. Okay, so you always want to have qualified column names, but you do not want to qualify measures. Okay, so with measures, you just list those in brackets, and you do not put the table name in front of that. So that will be just some best practice in terms of formatting and writing your DAX code. And then also I have a point in here about using folders for organization in your model. So let's say you have a measures table in your data set that has 50 measures in it. Instead of having them listed all out individually, you can use folders for organizing those and making it easier on your end users to do that. Along with a DAX concept of using variables, also consider that a best practice of using variables. And I'll talk about a situation where it would make sense to do that in my demo here. You want to avoid bidirectional filters and relationships. So in our data model there, we had a simple star schema dimensional model where we had one-to-many relationships. We want to avoid having bidirectional relationships because that can have some negative effects in the results that are returned in our DAX calculations. There are situations where bidirectional filters are appropriate, such as role level security or using a security table in your model. But I would say the majority of the times you'll want to try and avoid that for those unforeseen, so to speak, consequences in your result sets within your DAX calculations. Avoid complex filtering. So I'll show an example of that where with the way that you construct your DAX statement, you can actually, there's an easier way to write in a filter than what my complex filtering example will show. It's tough without a visual here, so we'll get to that in the demo. And then finally, using third-party tools to fine-tune your DAX expressions. And some of you may be familiar with these: DAX Studio, Tabular Editor, and VertiPack Analyzer. Those are all free tools, and you can find those on SQLBI.com. And those are just great tools that are designed around optimizing your data set. I mean, it's literally, one of the tools is called VertiPack Analyzer, which is the same name as the VertiPack engine, which is used in the background there. Okay, and these other two are designed around optimizing your data model. Okay, based on some of those best practices that I mentioned before, along with many others. So if you haven't, check those out. Check out SQLBI.com. Not sure we'll have time to get to examples of that coming up here, but great tools to use with your analysis services and Power BI data model development, I'll say. Whoops. So with that, I'm going to hop back into my file here. I'm going to go to the demo. I'm going to delete my other changes that I had from before so that it'll load faster, and we shouldn't need to reload the data here, hopefully. Oh, good, just the small tables here. So the first topic is evaluation context, and I don't necessarily have measures of for evaluation context. There isn't any DAX expressions that you can say, you know, here's under the category of evaluation context, but this is more of a concept of understanding the filtering behavior of in your DAX measures here. So as I mentioned, there's two types. There's row context and there's filter context. Within an evaluation context. The row context states that you'll always, it always contains a single row. Okay, so in that, when evaluating at the row level, okay, you're gonna, such as in an iterator function, okay, you're going to evaluate that single row and go over that. In the filter context, that can go across tables. Okay, so as your data model may be designed, you know, in this case, that was my bi-directional example. But in my dimensional data model here, okay, as long as your tables are related, that would be considered a filter context. Okay, so I have my date table related to my sales table. By filtering a value from date, okay, that filter context transitions through my data model based on those relationships. As you can see, as we will move to iterators, okay, if I have an iterator DAX calculation, iterative DAX calculation, excuse me, okay, that is going to evaluate at the row level. Okay, so in my matrix example here, okay, you can see that that row context, okay, and the way that I've designed this measure, okay, is evaluating at the row level there, along with these other ones. You can see the values differ at the row level, as opposed to in a slicer, that's a filter level. And I should say also in the matrix here, that's filtering by these different values as well. So transitioning from that into iterator functions, I have a couple of examples here that I want to talk through. And I will share this demo file and presentation after today as well. So you'll have these examples if you'd like. So in here, and I also have a built-in variable example as well. So we'll kind of cover both in this iterator function. So in this case, I've used a SumX function for my model. And I've also incorporated variables. So first, I guess we'll start from the top down and discuss the variable portion. Variables are a way to essentially create expressions or calculations in the same calculation as what you're evaluating. So my example here is I am creating sum of revenue as my revenue variable. I could create that as a separate measure in my model, and I could call that just as I am in this expression. But let's say revenue or sum of revenue is something that I'm not going to reuse later on. So it's kind of a one-time calculation. Okay, those are examples of where using variables can help keep your data set as clean as possible, or your data model as clean as possible. Because if I'm not going to use this again, then I can use a variable, and it will only calculate that one time in my expression here, and then I can call it again later on. Okay, similarly, I'm using a second variable for cost because the overall calculation is gross profit for this specific product category of rural. Okay, so and then the syntax for that for variables is VAR, and then space, and then your variable name. And your variable name can't have any spaces in it. Okay, so if I try to do revenue rural, for example, I'm going to get a squiggly red line here because it needs to be no spaces there. Okay, but either way, I'm going to delete that last word. And then after you're done defining your variable calculations, you have to type in the word return. Okay, that is then going to allow you to finish your calculation and call those variables that you've just defined. Okay, so VAR, define your variable, and then make sure you type in return to allow you to use those. After this, this is my iterator function. In this case, I'm doing SUMX. Okay, within SUMX, you have to define a table first, so some type of table value. And in this case, I'm including a table with a filter. Okay, so you can see my filter function here, and I'm saying filter the product table, okay, for only the product categories that are equal to rural. Okay, so if I'm reading this function, I'm going to filter out everything in my SUMX here, and then for product category of rural, and then I'm going to do revenue minus cost, which is my gross profit definition, and I'm going to sum that at the row level. Okay, so that's what this is all doing in here. And as you can see, okay, I'm showing rural gross profit in here. Is my third measure, and you can see that for product category, it's only evaluating for that filter of rural. Okay, so that's all you can see there. And I'm going to take a pause about that. You guys hear me still?
Yep, you're coming through.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, so that's an example at the row context level of how you can use an iterator function to go row by row of your detail, and also include a filter in there so that it is only evaluating that that context that you want it to. Any questions on that?
Feel free to unmute if you have a question. I don't think there's a lot of people trying. Otherwise, going once. Here we go. How do you get totals to work?
In terms of totals on your entire visual, or just for that function?
Entire visual. because you can see you have two different totals there. I know it's at a row level. Your total at the row level still has the filter down to it, so I don't know what the difference, what's causing that.
Good question. Okay, so an iterator function is going to take the row context that it has, okay, and it's going to evaluate that based on, you know, the row detail that's in the visual. So you can see here that for my product category, okay, on these rows, okay, it's going to give you the overall category total. Okay, but you can see here in my card visual, okay, that's showing the same 15.5 billion that my total is on my matrix. Okay, so at the total level, those are matching there. Okay, at the row context level, okay, for each one of these categories, and I believe the next one would be manufacturer, it's going to show those individual values there. Okay, so that's, I wish I had more time to go in onto like evaluation context, because it's tricky to understand, and I may not be doing the greatest job of explaining it. Okay, but within that row versus your filtered context, that's going to be key in understanding kind of how DAX calculations are written and kind of how to understand them. Now, to get to the point of showing the overall total, okay, outside of kind of ignoring the row and the filter context, that kind of leads into the next topic of the all function. Okay, so I have a couple of examples here. So the all mixed revenue is my sample calc here. And what I'm doing here is I'm using a calculate statement. And you can think of calculate statement as kind of the starting point for writing a calculation, or most calculations, I would say. Okay, but the only time you do need to use one of those if you are using a filter in your statement. So for example, if I go back to my SumX example calculation here, I don't need to write a calculate statement in front of this sum sales revenue, because I'm not doing any type of filtering. Now, if I did add a calculate statement, it's not going to error out. Like, that will still, you know, I won't get any red squiggling lines, but it's just adding verbiage into my DAX calc. So jumping back to my all mixed revenue here, since I do have a filter, I'm going to start with a calculate statement. And I do have a sum revenue in here, okay, for total revenue. Okay, so I have that in. And my next piece is going to be adding this all clause in my filter. And what this is going to do is this is going to override all of my filter context in my report page. So you can see here, I have a year slicer. Okay, I have a category manufacturer product type slicer. You'll see that when I selected the year slicer, for example, my all mixed revenue, that value changed. Okay, but you'll notice that it doesn't change at the row context level for product category. And it also didn't change for the product category values that I selected in my slicer. And that's because in the measure definition, in my filter, I put all for the product dimension. Okay, and I'm saying for all the product values, okay, only return product category equal to mix. Okay, so essentially by adding in that all filter, okay, I am ignoring, okay, any other filter context on my page here. Okay, by adding that all clause. So it's a very powerful DAX function, but understanding how it works with your filtering is important before you would implement something or implement that in your DAX calculation. There's also all except and all or all last non-blank, something along those lines. So there's a couple others that are in this somewhat of an all function category to check out as well when creating these. But I think we're getting short on time here at the end. So
starting to wrap up.
Yep, I'm gonna start to wrap up here. One last little tip I want to show, just with creating measure folders. If you haven't done that before, there's a quick tip to do that. And so if you go into the model view of your report, I can click on a measure, and in the properties menu here, there's a display folder. And within that display folder, you can type in the name of that folder, and then with a /, you can create a subfolder off of that. Okay, so for example, if I deleted that / and name, it would move that measure to the main folder. Okay, the other cool thing, you can also hit Control or Shift and multi-select in your measures and have that display folder value change all at once. So you can see I multi-selected total revenue, total units, and gross profit, and move those all to the base measure folder here. So I know that was a best practice I included with DAX. Just wanted to show you that there. Remember to use a / and not a \. Otherwise it won't work there for the subfolders. So last tip I wanted to show. Thanks a lot for hanging on, everybody, in the group today. I know it went a little long, but and thank you all, Paul, Nicole, Greg, and Steve for allowing me to present.
Sure thing. Thank you so much for some great content. I know that we had some of our highest attendance and longest stuff to get through at the front, but I really appreciate it. Let's see if this final question here they had in chat is quick or not. Marcus, creating custom measure folders. Can you mimic all these in SSAS tabular model itself?
You can. You can do all of that functionality in a tabular model or multidimensional. So analysis services in general there. And it's super slick in Tabular Editor. You can just use normal copy paste keyboard functionality to move that stuff around.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you. Great. Well, then let's wrap up. Everybody was thanking you, Marcus, in the chat. It worked out really well. Appreciate your time. And if you want to put into your chat a link to the page that you might recommend to check out for Skyline. I know that you've been very helpful with our meetup, and others should know that you've got a whole set of free webinars and updates that you've got out there that Skyline has you put out. So put a link to that, and let people should sign up and get those too.
Awesome. Thank you. I will share that shortly here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marcus. This was awesome.
All right. Steve, do you want to wrap us up? I'm going to put a thing into the chat encouraging everybody to give us some feedback. And I've stolen your email and my email. You may see there to encourage folks to let us know.
All right. I'm displaying the last slide in our deck to show the next meeting date. So put that on your calendar. We'll have more details as we gather speakers and member shares. Yeah, I want to thank Marcus and everybody. We had quite a slate today.
Yes. Excellent.